Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT One, the consultancy that helps companies create value from data to accelerate growth. Our guest today is Jared Huke, founder and CEO of Daito Design Amsterdam. Daito Design is a strategy, consulting, and design firm focused on creating impactful innovations for enterprises. In this talk, we discussed how user-centric software design can improve the success of IoT solution deployment in the energy sector. We also explored the complex interactions between user experience, business design, technology development, and risk management. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, you can email us at team@iot1.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research, strategy, or training initiative that you'd like to discuss, please email me directly at erik.walenza@iot1.com. Thank you.
Jared, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So you run an interesting business, or you're an interesting focus area, let's say the energy sector for a digital company. And then with a Japanese name and theme behind, and of course based in Amsterdam. So there's got to be some background story here. So maybe that's a good place for us to kick off. How did I suppose you're Dutch originally, although I know you were over at University of Texas. So you've been kind of hopping around the world a little bit. How did you end up setting up a digital design company focused on the energy sector with a Japanese name in Amsterdam?
So I'm actually not Dutch, so we're even more inexplicable, I guess, in some ways. So Daito Design is really focused on this transformation of these legacy companies into the new digital space, and with that, there's a lot of muscles that they have to sort of redevelop. Specifically, I think mobility in a big way, moving to mobile applications. And IoT and connected devices really forced their hand. They couldn't just build these big, ugly, multi-screen software systems that they'd gotten away with, where they were more engineered than designed. And so I'm from Austin, Texas, originally. I started at the University of Texas in physics and astronomy, ended up with a fine arts degree with a concentration in design theory and methodology. It was, the 90s were a fun time. I ended up taking a job after a referral from my first company that was a virtual reality company in the mid-90s. It took me to Southeast Asia, working on various software and sort of digital marketing products. In the middle of all that, I had a sustainable building materials and furniture company. Came back to the States, worked in the agriculture space for a while, which I find somewhat, again, sort of inexplicable in terms of some of the decision making. I had found myself in China working in luxury brands, so Tag Heuer, L'Oreal, Armani, and then ultimately kind of needed to find my way back to the States after expatting myself for a bit. And I was working in Houston with a company that's really focusing on mobile application engineering, and they really didn't have a design practice. And with mobility came this real urgent need to get the user experience correct, because if you have something that's vibrating nonstop in your pocket, or if you're wearable or something like that, the experience starts to really matter. It's not just a desk somewhere with a bunch of alarms or alerts going off. It's on you at all times. And so that kind of forced this observation, or this need to get into the user experience with these heavy enterprise clients. Houston, Texas, unsurprisingly, has a lot of energy going on. So that's oil and gas, that's utilities, did some very interesting work with some nuclear companies as well. And kind of decided to continue that on. And that was sort of where Daito was born from, was from this idea of bringing some of that luxury brand touch and feel that I was working on in China into this industrial, steel toe boot and hard hat kind of space that was trying to figure out how to digitally transform and had a procurement and IT and cultural barriers to innovation that user-centered design was able to sort of penetrate and go through that. And in that space, we brought in the sort of the practice of human factors, which is a sort of a variant of the user research world, and brought that together with this high touch, high finish design approach. And that seemed to be a pretty winning combo. And so that idea of craft and craftsman was kind of where the idea of Daito and this Japanese concept of shokunin or sort of honorable craftsman came about. And we wanted to kind of be a different sort of agency. We wanted to be an agency that was humble and sort of a quiet companion with these giants that we were with. And instead of coming in as a lot of the consulting firms or larger design firms that had a lot of arrogance when they would, and hubris, frankly, when they would come to these innovation projects. And so that and I'm an Aikido practitioner, so we do a lot of sword work in Aikido, and we're trying to find a name that kind of sounded cool and touched on this idea of this sort of perfect tool at the side of these giants. And so that was the genesis of Daito.
Okay. Fascinating backstory. Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, but I'm sitting here in Shanghai right now.
I didn't realize that. Well, please go get some xiaolongbao for me. I am desperate for some solid dumplings. Yangs would also be totally acceptable. So please indulge yourself for those of us stuck abroad.
Well, I wish I could fly over for a visit and bring some Waimai, but I haven't been out of the country obviously for a couple of years now.
Yeah, it's been a bit restrictive lately. My mother-in-law just returned back a little over a month ago, and she actually she stopped through LA, but she just arrived and is being quarantined as we speak. So yeah, I guess stay put is kind of the theme right now in China.
Yeah, exactly. No, but this is a fascinating background. I mean, if you look back before I was born, let's say, a lot of cutting edge was coming from industrial. And I guess that is still, that is still the case. But it does feel now that consumer is moving faster in most areas. And of course, luxury moves very fast in specific areas around the user experience. And so being able to walk that back to industrial makes a lot of sense. Are you right now, I guess, let's see, it's 8 here. So you must be in Amsterdam, not in Austin. Is that your base right now?
Yeah, so I'm expanding Daito in Europe. So we've been here for about a year in Amsterdam. There's a lot of sort of pro-business treaties that allow U.S. companies to expand in the Netherlands. And we also, Shell is one of our clients. And so there's a lot of reasons for us to sort of be around where the Dutch are. And there's a lot of energy happening in the Netherlands, whether that's solar, offshore, or traditional stuff. There's a lot of innovation here, a lot of interesting hydrogen work that's happening in the area. And so for us, it just seemed like a logical extension. And as my backstory implies, I don't tend to stay put for too long. And I guess we were just kind of in the mood to try somewhere else. And the Dutch have been very gracious in having us, and our kids are in Dutch public school and all of that. And it's so far been a lovely experience.
Yeah, great. Well, it's a great country and a great business environment. So that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a bit about the energy sector and user experience, because although the story that you just spelled out makes sense, you also have this backdrop of a tremendous amount of regulation and legacy infrastructure that's 30 years old or older, and probably priorities that are not so much oriented around how convenient this is for somebody who's on the ground on a site, but much more maybe some kind of financial metric, which obviously matters, but you I would imagine have different tensions in terms of priorities. So what is maybe we can start at a high level. What is the landscape for when you're looking at a software or a digital project in the energy sector and you're trying to approach it from a user-centric perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting world. So each of the energy sectors that we operate in, so that's the traditional, oil and gas, nuclear, solar, and we've got some interesting things happening in wind and some aspirations towards some of the emerging hydrogen economy. They all have some different kinds of constraints. There's as simple as things explode in oil and gas. They don't do that as much in nuclear, or if they do, you don't really have any other problems because it takes care of, the whole area. Radiation being a quite a theme when we're working in some of the older plants. And so these environments, they have very different regimens about them and cultures about them. But at the end of the day, they're all trying to do the same thing, which is do more with less. None of them have as many resources as they would like, and they're all very nervous about what's coming. The war in Ukraine has added, several logs to the fire of uncertainty around hyper volatility and, supply constraints and whatnot. Europe is about to have I think, a fairly uncomfortable winter, which is going to inspire a lot of a change of consumer and industrial behaviors around what do we do when these things start moving around very dynamically. So from a user-centered perspective, I'd say the business goals are often fairly similar. There's a rising interest in automation. So how ultimately can we do more work with less people? We saw that with lease operators, where a lease operator would be going around to 15 to 30 wells, and they wanted to take it to 50 to 100 wells in a day, for one operator to manage. With nuclear, it's hard to recruit for that. There's a large retiring workforce and all of that, and they've got a lot of pricing constraints. Oil and gas, the writing's kind of on the wall, I would say, in some ways. I mean, there's still going to be some oil and gas in the foreseeable years, but obviously, the EVs and a lot of the decarbonization efforts are making, I think they're non-ignorable facts at this point. And so they're all trying to figure out how to stay relevant, how to automate, how to do more with less. Many of them, I would say, believe that technology plays a key role in their ability to do that. And every single one of them has significantly failed efforts in attempting to do often some very simple things, whether it's just going to some basic digitized workflows, trying to remove paper from their work systems, et cetera. All of these industries have major deployment failures. Typically, from my experience, that usually falls down on because they did not do their diligence around the user experience piece of that. So that they might have the code, generally correct or functional or performant. They've got a great business case for it, maybe. But when it comes to the users, these are scientists, engineers, and businessmen that, as for certain demographics, are not necessarily renowned for their empathy, right? and their ability to understand the psychology of people that are trying to do very challenging work in very difficult environments. And that's what we really enjoy, is those really hard to reach environments where you have people that are in highly noisy environments, heat, stress, radiation, et cetera, where they're trying to solve these challenging problems. And they need an interface to a phone or an iPad or some other device that is there with them and not making their job harder. More often than not, poorly considered software slows down people's work, at least on the first, often 3 to 5 iterations of the software, to get it to something that actually they start to see those return on investments. And so I think that's a lot of our business model really is around those efficiencies on the execution side, helping them figure out what it needs to be quickly so that they can build it, correctly. And that churn and that risk associated with not doing the user experience work, we've seen it really blow up in people's faces and are often brought in to sort of rectify software that was sort of ill conceived or ill executed, according to the user's perspective.
Yeah, interesting. So we do more work here at IoT One in manufacturing sector, being here in Shanghai or in China,
Mhm.
and then in more traditional enterprise. And if I'm just thinking as you're talking through the user experience, I'm thinking most of the cases we're either working then in a very controlled environment, a factory, right, where there's a
Mhm.
dedicated network, or we're working with different people who might be at very different levels in the hierarchy, but they're all sitting at a desktop computer, basically, or they all
Mhm.
have their mobile phone. And so, even though they might have different permissions, have different views, and so forth, they can fundamentally work with the same interface. And now, as you're talking, I'm thinking about somebody who, I don't know, it could be a solution that's being used by middle management or senior management at headquarters, and then also being used by somebody who's on an oil rig who has to keep his hands free, has oil on his hands, etc. And not just needing different views, but also maybe even needing kind of a different interface or a different way of interacting. I mean, is that am I going too far here? Is that kind of one of the challenges? I'm thinking what differs here in this sector versus the sectors that I'm more comfortable with.
Well, I mean, I think it would be adjacent to what you're talking about because you have shipments that are going in and out of those factories and warehouses, and there's packaging and whatnot. There's deployment of whatever devices that you're making. There's maintenance on the devices, changing batteries or sensor calibrations and things like that. There's also with what you're making, what does that connect to? How do people ultimately use those devices in a way that is successful? Because if that end user is successful and the business that deployed those is successful, your orders will increase, et cetera. So it may be that in the manufacturing space, it's a very sort of controlled, more desktop environment. But I would think that there's probably maintenance organizations at the warehouse or at the manufacturing plants that are mobile. They're walking around. They're popping the hood on things and looking under there, trying to figure out why is it doing the thing. Why is it not doing the thing the way it was expected to, et cetera. And so there's these field operation people that are out there trying to understand what's going on. They may be up a ladder, they may be crawling into a space, et cetera. And so that really does force a different user experience. You can't just throw a desktop, that's from multi-monitor display and throw that on someone's phone and hope that they're going to be able to pinch and zoom and scroll around to find what they need to click on. They need to have a very methodical and very contextually aware ecosystem that is giving them just in time or the right information. Because if you're doing a maintenance or you're taking something offline that impacts production, all of a sudden everybody's really, really interested in making sure that experience is done efficiently, right? So every second that those machines are offline, that plant is losing money, and so that's a lot of those sort of critical moments where you can't get things wrong. I mean, obviously, we deal with some very sort of hazardous environments where if you do things wrong, people can be injured, or there can be environmental or other impacts. But I think that the principles are generally the same. There's a lot of assumptions that go into software that goes wrong. We just had a project recently where the project brief was very clear. We're definitely building this on an iPad. iPad is the only screen that will be able to hold all of this data. Absolutely, iPad. I've heard it like 5 times on the onboarding into this project. Okay, sounds like it's a likely iPad. I'm sure these guys have done their diligence. Let's just do a few user interviews. And I think we were only managed to get about 6 user interviews. And one of the questions was, how do you feel about an iPad interface? And they said, well, frankly, with the gear that I have to carry to go do my job, if I have another big piece of hardware like an iPad in a protective case, I'm probably just going to leave it at my desk because I don't have room and it's heavy, and et cetera, et cetera. So if it's not on my phone, I won't use it. So this was assumptions done across the board with multiple vendors that were all collaborating on this project that had already made a decision with zero validation from the field. In a matter of a couple of hours, we were able to find out that fundamentally, all of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars spent developing this state-of-the-art software would not be used because the end users don't have another set of hands to carry it. And so if they can make something that fits in their pocket, sure, they'll bring it along and they'll use it. So that obviously changes the design requirements from, we're just going to take our desktop screen and put that on an iPad, so it'll be a little smaller, but not a big deal, to we need a mobile phone, form factor to build this software around. That's a complete reconceptualization of what that software is and how it works. Luckily, we were able to find this out before it was built, and coincidentally, probably saved them several $million in having to redo the UI, because when they deployed it out in the field, all of the users would revolt and say, I can't carry this. I don't have room for it. So yeah, it's an interesting space, and there's some sort of simple, fundamental, user due diligence that I think can keep a lot of these things from, going sideways.
Yeah, that's an interesting example, because I guess, on the one hand, you're doing business design and you're working with a certain group of people on that and understanding the underlying business requirements and the model. And then on the other hand, you have the users. And I guess ideally you would be engaging with the users first. And I suppose this tool is somehow supposed to be helping them do their job better. So you would expect that they would be kind of early, engaged in the process and helping to steer the not just the choice of user interface, but also the functionality and et cetera. How do you navigate these situations just as a service provider when you come into a situation where they say, okay, here's what we want to build? It sounds like in this case you were able to navigate, but it was almost it was fortunate that you kind of lined up those interviews early. Ideally, I guess those interviews would have been baked in before this company kind of.
Well, they wouldn't need me then, right? If they knew how to do this. So luckily their lack of process is is putting food on my table, I suppose. So for us, it's I'm ultimately our aspiration is to apply scientific method to innovative or creative pursuits. So when the client comes to us with a brief, we assume that, from the boardroom to the VPs, to the directors, to the managers who get funding to do these projects, that there are so many assumptions and biases baked in. We've always done it this way. This is how we do things. We've heard all of this a million times. And maybe there was a vendor who plays golf with the right person, and all of a sudden, we're going to work with this software because they're an industry player, et cetera. And we take that as sort of the educated guess in the scientific method, where it's like, okay, this is a good place to start. This is not our end state. And so we refer to that as the initial framing of the problem statement. We then work with the stakeholders in a multi-day workshop often, and we'll map out what is the user journey. We'll identify the research plan, what are the business goals, technical limitations or enablers that we need to be aware of. And then all of a sudden, it's amazing just having everybody in the same room, whether it's virtual or physical. All of a sudden, the problem statement usually shifts around a little bit. It doesn't maybe change completely, but there's a refinement that goes on. And a lot of our goal is to help people not build things that don't need to be built, that won't get them that business value. And so we then go into a discovery program with our clients, usually in the effort to sort of lock down a proof of concept or a POC. And that can be between 6 to 12 weeks or so, depending on scale and logistics of getting to site and whatnot. And in there, we will do the due diligence of really mapping out in granularity what is their process. Not what is their process that they think it is, but what is it actually on the ground? How do people actually work? A lot of times from one site to another, with some of these larger companies, they've acquired them, and they have different cultures, different procedures, different org structures. There's a lot of legacy in these big companies. So we map all of that out so that we can understand the landscape that these innovations are going to happen in. And then at the end of that, what we do is we'll give them a prioritized list of requirements that says, it's that whole Pareto, 80% of your value is in this feature set. These other ones, yeah, if you have time and you just want to put some whistles and bells on it, great. But this is the stuff that will get you that return on your investment and will create the net present value that you need to sell this to your higher ups. So that's kind of one of the key things that we deliver for them is the ability to get their projects funded, right? Because a lot of times they may have a algorithm, they may have gotten into Python, and they've got some ML stuff that they're playing around with, and they're seeing that this can be valuable, but they don't know how to make it into a product that will really, when the rubber hits the road, give them that value. And so we map that all out for them in granularity. It's data driven, totally defendable, through observation and measurement. And then we'll also render out a concept of what this new product would look like. And of course, with design in our name, I'm a big fan of our design team, and it looks amazing, and people get excited and go, okay, here's to sound very Texan, here's the steak with a little sizzle on it, a bow on top. Let's get this funded, and then they can move on to building out the enterprise scale of that POC. Sometimes we do the prototyping in code. Sometimes we just hand off at the design phase. And a lot of times we'll embed with their engineering team to make sure that their engineers are executing as designed, which is not a huge risk, but things just start kind of veering off course if you leave it sort of unattended. So we'll usually have a partial designer that embeds with their team over the life cycle of the product, so that they're able to realize that ROI, and they're not implementing new sort of bugs or user friction points. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, when you see these salty old engineers in plants or wherever our job takes us, see their faces light up and are like, oh, please build this software before I retire. I can't believe it's so easy. I've just been waiting for these 2 data points so that I can make decisions. Thank you. And it's a really rewarding job. I love making gruff people delighted, which is, I don't know, odd career choice, but what can I say? We love it.
Yeah, well, bringing good design to enterprise software, that is certainly the God's work, right? But I'm curious then about also the business side of this. So if I think about my still somewhat limited experience in this sector, my instinct is that on the business case there are extremes. So there's on the one on the value lever side, you have extremes of potential upside. If I'm thinking about predictive maintenance for an automotive manufacturer, they they would say, well, okay, we've got a bunch of engineers on hand anyways, and things don't break down that often. If they do, somebody will walk over and fix it. But then if you look at predictive maintenance on an offshore wind turbine, you're like, okay, well then we've got to get somebody on a helicopter and get them out there. And so that is kind of orders of magnitude more costly to solve. So on the value lever side in these extreme environments, you have a bigger potential value on, at least in some cases, right, around being able to solve problems using software and data. But then on the cost side, I suppose you also have a bigger lever in terms of risk, right? Of, okay, what is it really going to take in order for us to deploy a solution in a extreme environment where it's probably more complicated to understand all the variables that are going to contribute to the success or failure of the solution. I understand that you kind of walked this through the POC process, and then you're not building the machine learning algorithms and so forth, as I understand. But it sounds like you are still quite involved up front in terms of the business design. So when you're dealing with very extreme environments where a variable prediction around what a variable might look like could be off by some significant value, how do you help to guide decisions? How do you evaluate risk and then therefore kind of estimate ROI ranges in these types of environments?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things in there. So the first thing I would say is it sounds, we don't have a huge amount of experience in the manufacturing. We're mostly, I think we've touched the logistics side of it. But, since the Industrial Revolution, manufacturing has done everything it could to automate and eliminate the human experience from manufacturing, right? I mean, that the automation, robots, et cetera. And I think that our strength is really in, you can with humans, you can either augment them or eliminate them, right? And most companies are trying to do some combination of both of them. Ultimately, I think full automation is everyone's goal, but we're not there yet in most sectors. In going to the ROI question, so we are again our sort of our mission is to eliminate assumptions. So this is where the human factors lens is very useful, and we do an ethnographic study of these particular work environments. So ethnographic meaning on site, hard hats and fire retardant clothing or what have you, to go out into the field and actually measure, how often are they making mistakes? How many meetings do they have? How many times do they forget tools and have to go back to the HQ or whatnot? How long does it take to walk from one side of the plant to the other? All of these things contribute, and so we produce very large spreadsheets. And for some of our clients, they may say, we don't know everything that can be innovated in this area, but we think there's a lot. We think that, we have 1,000 people at this plant and we want to see if we can get to 500. If you can do that, that's I don't know, tens of millions of dollars a year in potential savings. So where do we start? Do we do virtual reality training? Do we do drones for observations and tooling? Is it where do we start? And that paralysis is a lot of what we're able to sort of optimize. So we'll do create what I like to call a managed innovation portfolio. This is where we'll go out and do assessments across the organization, across multiple work groups, et cetera. Do these calculations and create a sort of prioritized chart, if you will, that maps against timeline, size of the opportunity, and then ultimately risk of deployment, right? So doing a simple inventory checklist that saves people, an hour a day or an hour a week doing their inventory, versus doing drones and virtual environments and all of this, right? Amazing, but very costly and very questionable return things, and it takes multiple years to create. We'll plot all of these against a chart and say, well, if you do maintenance and inventory and training application, and you can build all three of those in the next 18 months, you'll realize the same amount of money as you will with your fancy drone thing, but that may take you 3 years to build and deploy, and the risk of your delivering it is extremely high because you really have no experience with drones. And so, that's something that we would recommend as a wait and see, or realize the return on these simple applications first, and then invest those returns towards these more moonshot kind of ideas. And so that's a lot of the way we do this. Is we come from a data centric decision-making approach, as opposed to, look, shiny object, let's all go run after it. Maybe blockchain's going to solve all of our problems. Maybe, it'll be AI or quantum computing or sure. I'm a big, a technologist and believer in the nature of human experience. But I think that without quantification, we can very quickly let emotions take the better of us. And a lot of times, there's discussions at the boardroom or the VP level that kind of push down, I think, unrealistic expectations on people that are tasked with trying to uncover these things. And so we have a skill set that allows us to swim in those waters very efficiently, a culture that is very disciplined around what innovation makes sense and what doesn't, and are able to communicate that very effectively to our clients so that they can realize this. And sometimes the projects are quite small. We have an application that needs some optimization. Other times it's we want to figure out how to not shut down a plant. And we need to save this amount of money in the next 2 years to save, 1,000 people's jobs. How do we go about doing that and realizing those opportunities? And so, the only way to manage something like that is to measure it properly. And I think that the user-centric perspective with a bit of the business consulting muscle in there has proven to be, I think, quite effective.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's the right fit, right? There's another aspect which we haven't really touched on yet, but when you talk about risk, it brought this to mind, which is the topic of cybersecurity. So over the past, 3 to 5 years, this has really emerged as a critical threat for energy infrastructure, and something that you certainly need to keep in mind as you start putting more kind of touch points to infrastructure into people's mobile phones and laptops and IoT devices and so forth. Do you have any particular expertise in that, or how do you factor that into your decision making when the risk is not the risk of maybe the solution not being adopted or the ROI not being met, but the risk is some external actor attacking the solution?
Yeah, we've participated. We're obviously not writing the code, which is usually the point of entry for a lot of hacking or penetrations. There is also sort of behavioral mapping, and we didn't get to deploy this particular approach, but there was, I think, a lot of value in it. For example, it was a large pharmaceutical company, and they were producing in a low-cost country, and they had all of their procedures on these iPads, and it's a poor country, so they a lot of people were ripping off these iPads. They didn't really care about the iPads because they were a few $100s each, but they had $1 billion worth of research on them that was walking out the door. And so we were exploring something as simple as like a beacon, like geolocation with high amount of precision that was going to basically be in a permanently encrypted state and only decrypt when in proximity to the machines that those particular procedures were going to be acted on. And so, I think that location is an interesting tool. And I'm working on a white paper called The Laws of Context, which kind of touches on some of this, which is, the built environment actually maps to a lot of our sort of security and access control behaviors. For example, if you're at a cafe and you're on their Wi-Fi and they have a bunch of smart light bulbs, should you be able to turn the lights on and off? Well, I think most people would say no, you can't just turn off the lights in the middle of a busy restaurant. But if you went behind the counter and near the manager's office, yeah, that would make sense that if you were in that location, you would have access. And so there seems to be some interesting structures from the human behavioral standpoint that you can build in a system that maps experience to the built environment, which adds that security layer as well. And so, having the proximity, or for example, movement and other behaviors, like for example, your device goes south of the border, you should, your access restrictions should be immediately sort of shut off, or your device flagged as potentially out of control of your employee or user. So there's a lot of ways that from the human behavior expectations that you can have things. I mean, you can get into wearables and whatnot and get into some fairly invasive ideas around are people making good decisions? Are they in a state when they should be? If there's access control to let's say control systems, should they be opening and and closing pipeline valves in the middle of the night? At 2 a.m. Maybe if they're at the command center, probably not if they're located in a bar or something like that. So there's some there's a lot of different challenges around security, and humans clicking on email attachments or things like that. Those are the human behavioral things that bypass all of the best technical cybersecurity out there. And so obviously training and whatnot play a big part of that, creating a culture of that. And we have some of our clients that are actually moving away from connected devices entirely, and are actually air gapping some systems due to the fact that cybersecurity is been unable to successfully bar entry into those systems. So it is a very volatile space, and I think that some of what we are working on certainly can be a part of the cybersecurity landscape. But nothing's going to replace proper IT services in terms of just controlling and locking this down.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an arms race, and some of the concepts that you mentioned around location-based access and so forth, I think are really worth looking further into for companies that have at least relatively standard processes for where people should be working. Obviously, not all environments allow that, and human behavior is messy, so you're always going to have edge cases where somebody's going to be pissed off because their access was taken away for some reason. But certainly the human is typically the weak point in these systems, right? And so
always
understanding, always has been, and we'll see if there's some point in the future when that's no longer the case. But it seems like at least for the foreseeable future,
Well, humans are good at some very simple things. I mean, I think Elon Musk, when he was racing to get the Model 3 production, realized that he could only get to 97% automation on the execution of I don't have the exact numbers or quotes, so I'll have to look that up properly. But there was something as simple as, I think, like wiping down the windshield, or it was a very simple task, but it was going to cost him like $500 million to build the robots to do something that he could pay someone $15 an hour to just that humans can do very, very easily, and that automation was going to be a significant impact to and really no ROI in it. So humans still have a role, and I think that human intuition actually has some great capabilities, but there's also there's a lot of fallacy in human experience and biases and things like that. I mean, I've seen it out in the field where people are telling you that they're really good at something, and then they're making errors right in front of you. I've also seen where if you trust only automation and sensors, huge problems. I was in an oil field, and a guy went to the control system and shut down the gas line to this one facility. And then he waved to me and said, "Come over here and listen to this." And we put our ear next to the pipe, and we could hear the gas just flowing, at very high speed through the pipe. And he said, "If I trusted the system, I'd be dead right now, and so would you be." And so it's one of those things where there's our sensors fail, our automation has edge cases, and humans are really good at sort of improvising in some of those spaces. At the same time, we've always done it this way, creates problems that are hard to beat as well. In our culture, while sometimes very constructive, can also be very constraining and all that. And I think that's as much as anything what we try to do is to bring a lens to this, so that organizations can understand really what they're doing well, and then with the areas that need improvement, help them frame the problem correctly, so that they are solving the right problem. This one particular use case, it was a secured area, and they were searching vehicles going into the secured area. And they were sure that the problem was the security officers were too slow searching the vehicles. And so they were hammering them with training all the time. And the guys were very demoralized. They were holding up shipments into the plant. Everybody was yelling at them. It was a very tense environment. Well, we went out there and measured it, and actually realized that these guys are within a percentage point or two of the absolute fastest possible time spent searching a vehicle. The problem that they had is that they would call and say, this was a place that only had landlines due to various reasons, that your shipment is ready. And if somebody didn't answer the phone, the shipment would have to wait until that person called them. Other times there'd be missing paperwork. Other times people wouldn't be at their post, et cetera, et cetera. There would be missing, tags and things like that. It was almost every single problem except the problem they were trying to solve, which was people actually physically opening trunks and looking under vehicles and things like that. And that is the kind of thing that I think organizations do all the time, is that they create all this friction solving a problem right next to the root cause of what is happening. And so that's where fresh eyes and our sort of approach to things, I think, can help help them reach that itch that they've been trying to scratch for years, if not sometimes decades, depending on the organization.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. I mean, it's incredible how a concept can live in an organization when it is basically spreading word of mouth, by PPT, by kind of know-how, as opposed to getting a pair of eyes out on the situation and saying, well, let's actually figure out what's being done. And yeah, often it's not done, right? Because it's nobody's job to do that until they hire you, right? It's kind of nobody in the organization who says, it's my job today to go out there and watch and map out how things are done. Jared, I think we've covered a good bit of territory here, but this is probably a sector where you could take a lot of rabbit holes down. Anything particularly interesting that we haven't touched on yet that you think it would be important or interesting for folks to know?
Well, I think just bringing this back to IoT and devices and sensor-related data, we have a fair amount of experience either from enclosure design or consuming data from various telemetries and whatnot. I think that the thing that maybe the IoT world needs to understand is that the flow of data from the edge to the user, there's a lot lost in that space. And the benefit of those devices is it has to fit within an organization that's able to adapt around those devices and to make those useful and get the return on the investment. And I think that is what we've seen time and again. I mean, there's solar plants that are getting 200,000 data points from off the field every minute, I think it was, but they still don't know what work they should be doing today, for example, right? And so, that is the challenge and I think the opportunity with a lot of the hardware innovations in the IoT space is connecting that data with the business case and then ultimately the user, the technology, business and user brought together in a orchestrated ecosystem is really powerful. If any one of those is off, the whole thing kind of spins out of control pretty quickly. And I guess that would be sort of my parting wisdom, is that getting the sensors right is one of the steps, but it isn't that's not the end all of making of creating the value of your new technology.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think a little bit of an analog to maybe the late 1990s, early 2000s, right? We've invested a lot in the infrastructure. We now have the ability to kind of move data around. Now it's time to actually make use of it, make good software that people enjoy using and can really drive value from. So, I forgot, last question. What is the best way for folks to get in touch with you or get in touch with your team more generally?
We've got a website, Clutch LinkedIn. You can feel free to email me at jared.huke at daitodesign.com. Soon you'll throw that in the blurb somewhere around this podcast, and love to talk with you further. We take a very sort of humble position, as I mentioned, so I'm always open for conversations and discussions, even if it's there's no commercial aspect to it. So I'd love to meet anyone who's interested in what we were talking about.
Well, Jared, thanks. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
It was truly my pleasure, and excited about what you guys are doing. And thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@iot1.com.